Dr. Margaret Thompson's hand froze mid-injection, the syringe trembling an inch from Chief's IV line. The German shepherd's eyes weren't glazed with pain. They were crystal clear, alert, almost pleading. This wasn't the look of a dying animal. The clinic erupted in chaos as Earl Henderson's coffee cup crashed to the floor, ceramic shards scattering across linoleum while his grandson Tyler stumbled backward, knocking over a chair. The metallic clatter echoed through the sterile room like gunshots. Earl's weathered hands shook as he stared at his 11-year-old companion, remembering Martha's final words 3 years ago. "Promise me you'll take care of him." The old police chief had investigated enough cases to recognize when something wasn't right. Chief's desperate embrace around his neck wasn't surrender. It was a cry for help. "Stop everything," Dr. Thompson commanded, her voice cutting through Earl's grief. "We need new blood work. Now." What if they'd almost killed the only witness to his own attempted murder? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Earl "Pop" Henderson had weathered 74 Nebraska winters, but none had prepared him for the cold that settled in his chest the day Martha died. 3 years later, the old farmhouse on Maple Street still echoed with her absence. 2 coffee cups set each morning, then one quietly returned to the cupboard. The retired police chief's arthritic hands trembled slightly as he filled Chief's water bowl, his German shepherd watching with intelligent brown eyes that seemed to understand grief in ways humans never could. Millbrook, Nebraska had been Earl's whole world for 7 decades. Population 3,200 and shrinking, the town clung to life like morning frost on autumn grass. The grain elevator that once employed half the county had downsized to a skeleton crew, sending young folks packing for Lincoln or Omaha. Earl's pension of $1,847 monthly stretched thin, especially with his diabetes medication costing $340 each month. Martha's medical bills from her pancreatic cancer fight had drained their savings, $127,000 in debt that Earl was still chipping away at. $20 here, $50 there. Chief wasn't just a dog, he was Earl's lifeline to purpose. The 11-year-old German shepherd had served 8 years with the Millbrook Police Department before the incident at Jefferson Elementary changed everything. During the 2019 school shooting scare, Chief had taken down the armed intruder without hesitation, saving over 200 children. The psychological trauma afterward forced his early retirement. Loud noises made him shake, crowds made him anxious. Earl understood that kind of damage. Rebecca Henderson Walsh, Earl's 48-year-old daughter, carried her own burdens. Divorced with 2 teenagers, she worked night shifts at Millbrook General Hospital, barely scraping by on a nurse's salary while her ex-husband's child support arrived sporadically. Her guilt ate at her daily, guilt over not visiting Earl enough, guilt over suggesting he move to Sunset Manor assisted living, guilt over the growing distance between them since Martha's funeral. Rebecca saw her father's decline in the unpaid bills stacked on his kitchen counter, the way he forgot to take his blood pressure medication, how he talked to Martha's empty chair during dinner. Dr. Margaret Thompson had returned to Millbrook 6 months ago, tail between her legs after her Chicago veterinary practice failed. The small-town girl who'd sworn she'd never come back now found herself caring for her mother's advancing dementia while taking over the practice from Dr. Harold Brennan. The townspeople still remembered her as the rebellious teenager who'd gotten pregnant senior year and left for the big city. Now, 42 and childless after a miscarriage ended that early pregnancy, she felt like an outsider treating the pets of people who'd never forgotten her past. Dr. Brennan, meanwhile, nursed secrets darker than anyone suspected. 35 years of respected service in Millbrook hadn't erased his gambling addiction, and his recent trips to the Omaha casinos had cost him everything. $80,000 in debt to people who didn't accept payment plans. He'd grown desperate enough to consider options that would have horrified his younger self. Sunday morning arrived with the crisp bite of October air that Earl had come to associate with endings. Martha had died on a morning just like this one, when the maple leaves turned the color of old copper pennies, and the first frost kissed the pumpkins in their backyard garden. Earl pulled on his worn Carhartt jacket and clipped Chief's leash to his collar, the same ritual they'd performed every morning for the past 3 years since Martha's passing. "Come on, old boy," Earl murmured, his breath visible in the morning chill. "Let's go see Mama." Chief's tail wagged with less enthusiasm than usual, but Earl attributed it to the dog's advancing age. At 11 years old, the German Shepherd had earned his slower pace. They walked the familiar 6 blocks to Millbrook Cemetery, Chief's paws crunching through the fallen leaves as they made their way to Martha's grave. The headstone read, "Martha Louise Henderson, beloved wife and mother. She made everyone feel like family." Earl had been talking to Martha about his growing concerns. The bills were piling up again. The electric company had sent a final notice, and his diabetes medication would cost another $340 next month. Rebecca kept pushing him to consider Sunset Manor, but the thought of leaving the home he'd shared with Martha felt like a betrayal. Chief was the only thing keeping him anchored to their life together. "Don't know what I'd do without him, Martha," Earl said, kneeling to place fresh chrysanthemums on her grave. "He's all I got left of our family." Chief had been sniffing around the base of an oak tree when it happened. The dog suddenly stiffened, his legs trembling, then collapsed onto his side with a low whimper. Green bile poured from his mouth, staining the frost-covered grass. "Chief!" Earl's arthritic knees protested as he dropped beside his companion. The dog's breathing was shallow and rapid, his eyes rolled back showing mostly white. Earl's police training kicked in. Check for breathing, look for obvious injuries, get help fast. The 45-minute drive to the emergency veterinary clinic in Lincoln felt like hours. Earl's old Ford pickup truck rattled and wheezed as he pushed it 20 miles over the speed limit. Chief's 85-pound body sprawled across the bench seat. The dog had stopped vomiting but remained unconscious, his tongue lolling out a sickly gray color. Dr. Harold Brennan was covering weekend emergencies, a man Earl had known for 30 years. Brennan had treated 3 generations of Henderson family pets, from Earl's childhood beagle to the barn cats Martha loved to feed. His graying beard and kind eyes had always been reassuring, but today something seemed off. Brennan's hands shook slightly as he examined Chief, and Earl noticed expensive new boots beneath his medical coat. "How long has he been showing symptoms?" Brennan asked, his stethoscope moving across Chief's chest. "He was fine yesterday," Earl replied, watching his dog's labored breathing. "Maybe a little tired, but nothing like this." Brennan's examination was thorough, but grim. Blood samples disappeared into the lab, while X-rays revealed shadows that made Earl's heart sink. When Brennan returned with the results, his expression carried the weight of bad news that Earl recognized from his years delivering it to other families. "Earl, I'm sorry to tell you this, but Chief has advanced cancer," Brennan said, pointing to the cloudy areas on the X-ray images. "His liver and kidneys are failing. These tumors are aggressive. I'd say he has maybe 2 weeks left." The words hit Earl like a physical blow. Cancer. The same disease that had taken Martha, now claiming the only family he had left. His vision blurred as tears he hadn't shed since Martha's funeral threatened to spill over. "What are his options?" Earl asked, though he dreaded the answer. "We could try chemotherapy, but at his age, with this level of progression—" Brennan shook his head. "It would cost around $15,000, and honestly, it might only buy him a few more weeks of suffering." Earl's savings account held $12,000, money he'd carefully set aside for his own funeral expenses. Martha's medical bills had taught him the crushing weight of healthcare costs, and he couldn't bear the thought of dying in debt like she had. "The kindest thing," Brennan continued gently, "would be to let him go peacefully. I can schedule the procedure for Wednesday. Give you a few days to say goodbye." Earl's weathered hands trembled as he signed the paperwork, each signature feeling like another nail in Chief's coffin. Outside the clinic, Chief managed to walk to the truck under his own power, even wagged his tail when Earl opened the door. For a moment, hope flickered in Earl's chest. Maybe Brennan was wrong. Maybe Chief wasn't as sick as the tests suggested. But as they drove home through the Nebraska countryside, Chief laid his massive head on Earl's thigh and sighed deeply, as if he understood what lay ahead. Earl's tears finally came then, hot and silent, falling onto Chief's graying fur as they headed home to begin their final days together. The 3 days between diagnosis and scheduled euthanasia stretched before Earl like an endless prairie under storm clouds. Monday morning found him sitting at his kitchen table staring at the appointment card Dr. Brennan had given him. Wednesday, 2:00 p.m., final services. The clinical language couldn't mask what it really meant. He would watch his best friend die in 48 hours. Chief lay on his bed in the corner, the same plaid cushion Martha had bought him as a puppy. His breathing seemed labored, but his eyes followed Earl's movements around the kitchen with alert intelligence. When Earl filled his food bowl, Chief managed to eat a few bites of kibble, his tail giving a weak wag of appreciation. "Maybe we should visit all our old places, boy," Earl said, his voice thick with unshed tears. "Say goodbye proper-like." Their first stop was the Millbrook Police Department, housed in a brick building that had seen better decades. Chief's ears perked up at the familiar sounds: radio chatter, ringing phones, the squeak of Officer Martinez's desk chair. Word had spread quickly in the small town about Chief's diagnosis. Earl's former colleagues gathered around, sharing stories about the dog's years of service. "Remember when Chief tracked that missing kid through 3 miles of cornfield?" Officer Peterson said, scratching behind Chief's ears. "Found little Jimmy Carson stuck in that old drainage culvert." Chief's tail wagged stronger at the attention, and for a moment Earl almost believed the diagnosis was wrong. The dog seemed more alert here, surrounded by the familiar sounds and smells of his working life. But then Chief struggled to stand from his lying position, and reality crashed back down. Their next stop was Jefferson Elementary School, where Principal Roberts met them at the front entrance. The school had commissioned a small memorial plaque honoring Chief's heroic actions during the 2019 shooting scare. "Hero Dog, Chief Henderson, served with courage, saved with love." "He prevented a tragedy that day," Principal Roberts said quietly. 237 children went home safe because of Chief." Earl knelt beside his companion, reading the plaque aloud. Chief's ears twitched at the familiar words, but he didn't try to stand. The effort of walking from the car had exhausted him. Earl's chest tightened as he watched Chief's sides heave with each breath. The afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. Rebecca arrived as Earl was preparing Chief's medication, pain pills that Dr. Brennan had prescribed to keep the dog comfortable. She looked tired, dark circles under her eyes from another night shift at the hospital. "Dad, I took the day off work," she said, setting her purse on the kitchen counter. "Thought maybe I could help with Chief, spend some time together." Earl felt a flicker of gratitude despite their recent tensions. Rebecca had always loved Chief, even during her rebellious teenage years when she claimed to hate everything about small-town life. She knelt beside Chief's bed, running her hands through his graying fur. "Hey there, old friend," she murmured. "You hanging in there?" Chief's response surprised them both. He lifted his head and licked Rebecca's hand, something he hadn't done for Earl all morning. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears as she looked up at her father. "Dad, maybe I could walk him later. Give you a chance to rest?" Earl nodded, too emotional to speak. Watching his daughter show such tenderness toward Chief reminded him of better times, before Martha's death had driven wedges between them all. While Rebecca walked Chief around the backyard, Earl sat on the porch and called his grandson Tyler. The 16-year-old's voice cracked with emotion when Earl explained what was happening. "Grandpa, that doesn't make sense," Tyler said. "Chief was playing fetch with me last weekend. Dogs don't get that sick that fast, do they?" Earl had wondered the same thing, but Dr. Brennan's expertise was unquestionable. The man had been practicing veterinary medicine since before Tyler was born. Still, Tyler's words echoed Earl's own doubts. Chief had seemed fine just days ago, maybe a little tired, but nothing suggesting terminal illness. When Rebecca returned from the walk, Chief appeared even more listless. He barely lifted his head when she refilled his water bowl, and his breathing seemed more labored than before they'd left. Rebecca sat beside Earl on the couch, both watching Chief sleep fitfully. "Dad, have you thought about what comes after?" Rebecca asked gently. "I mean, after Wednesday?" Earl's jaw tightened. He knew where this conversation was heading, the same place it always led. Sunset Manor, assisted living, giving up his independence along with his companion. "I'm not ready to talk about that, Becca. But you can't keep living alone in this big house. You're 74 years old, diabetic, and you forget to take your medication half the time." Rebecca's voice carried the strain of months of worry. "The electric company sent another final notice. I saw it on your counter." "That's my business," Earl snapped. Then immediately regretted his tone. Rebecca was trying to help, even if her method felt like an attack on everything he had left. They sat in uncomfortable silence, watching Chief's labored breathing. Earl's mind drifted to Martha's final days, how she'd made him promise to take care of Chief no matter what. Now he was about to break that promise, and afterward he'd be truly alone for the first time in 51 years of marriage. Tuesday evening brought a phone call that made Earl's blood run cold. Dr. Brennan's voice sounded strange, almost rehearsed. "Just calling to confirm Wednesday's appointment, Earl. 2 o'clock sharp." "We'll be there," Earl replied. But something in Brennan's tone bothered him. There was an eagerness that seemed inappropriate for the circumstances. After hanging up, Earl walked to Chief's bed and knelt beside his companion. The dog's eyes opened, still remarkably alert despite his obvious illness. Chief lifted a paw and placed it on Earl's hand, a gesture of comfort that broke Earl's heart all over again. "I'm so sorry, boy," Earl whispered. "I don't know if I'm doing the right thing." That night, Earl couldn't sleep. He moved to the living room couch where he could watch Chief breathe, afraid that every exhale might be the last. Around 3 in the morning, he found himself talking aloud to Martha's empty chair. "Help me, Martha. I don't know what to do. The money's almost gone. Becca wants me in that place, and now, Chief—" His voice broke. "I can't lose him, too. He's all I got left of our family." Chief stirred at the sound of Earl's voice, lifting his head with obvious effort. In the dim light from the kitchen, the dog's eyes seemed to glow with an intelligence that made Earl shiver. It was almost as if Chief was trying to communicate something urgent, something important that Earl wasn't understanding. Wednesday morning dawned gray and drizzling, matching Earl's mood as he prepared for the drive to the veterinary clinic. Chief managed to walk to the truck without assistance, though his gait was unsteady. Earl helped him onto the bench seat, where Chief immediately laid his head on Earl's thigh, their familiar driving position from happier times. "You know where we're going, don't you, boy?" Earl said, his voice barely audible over the truck's engine. Chief's brown eyes looked up at Earl with such trust, such unconditional love, that Earl almost turned the truck around. But Dr. Brennan's words echoed in his mind. 2 weeks of suffering. Expensive treatments that wouldn't work. The kindest thing would be to let him go peacefully. As they pulled into the clinic parking lot, Earl noticed something that struck him as odd. Chief sat up straighter, his ears perked forward with interest rather than fear. For a dog facing death, he seemed remarkably alert and aware of his surroundings. Earl sat in the truck for several minutes, gathering courage he didn't feel. Through the clinic windows, he could see Dr. Brennan moving around inside, preparing for their appointment. But something nagged at Earl's consciousness, some detail that didn't fit the picture he'd been given. Chief suddenly turned and looked directly at Earl, then did something that made the old police chief's blood run cold. The dog placed both paws on Earl's shoulders in a full embrace, pressing his face against Earl's neck with desperate intensity. It wasn't the behavior of a dying animal saying goodbye. It was the behavior of someone trying to communicate a warning. Dr. Margaret Thompson entered the examination room with steady hands and a heavy heart, the syringe containing sodium pentobarbital prepared according to protocol. She had performed this procedure countless times in Chicago, but something about Chief's case nagged at her professional instincts. The German Shepherd lay on the metal table, his breathing shallow but his eyes remarkably clear and focused on Earl's face. Earl's weathered hands trembled as he stroked Chief's graying muzzle. "You've been the best friend a man could ask for," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Ever since Martha passed, you kept me going. I hope she's waiting for you on the other side." Chief responded by struggling to lift himself into a sitting position, then doing something that made everyone in the room freeze. The dog wrapped his front paws around Earl's neck in a full embrace, pressing his face against the old man's shoulder with desperate intensity. The embrace lasted nearly 30 seconds, far longer and stronger than a dying animal should be capable of. Dr. Thompson's hand stopped mid-motion, the needle hovering inches from Chief's IV port. Her trained eye caught details that contradicted everything in Dr. Brennan's file. Chief's nose was cold and wet, not dry as it should be in organ failure. His gums showed healthy pink coloration, not the pale yellow of liver disease. Most tellingly, his eyes held an alertness and intelligence that terminal patients rarely displayed. "Mr. Henderson," she said carefully, setting the syringe aside, "I need to ask you some questions before we proceed." Earl looked up through his tears, hope flickering in his chest like a candle in wind. "What kind of questions?" "Has Chief been eating at all this week?" "Some," Earl admitted. "Not much, but he managed a little kibble yesterday morning, even ate some of Mrs. Kowalski's leftover pot roast." Dr. Thompson frowned. Terminal cancer patients typically refused all food in their final days. She examined Chief's medical file more closely, noting that the X-rays were dated 3 days ago, but the blood work showed results that seemed inconsistent with the imaging. "I'd like to run some additional tests," she announced, ignoring the flash of irritation that crossed Dr. Brennan's face as he entered the room. "Margaret, we've already established the diagnosis," Brennan said firmly. "The kindest thing is to proceed as planned." But Chief's behavior had triggered Dr. Thompson's instincts, honed by years of emergency veterinary medicine. She knelt beside the examination table, speaking directly to the German Shepherd as if he could understand every word. "If you're trying to tell us something, boy, I'm listening." Chief's response was immediate and startling. He turned his head toward Dr. Brennan and let out a low, rumbling growl, not aggressive, but warning. The dog's hackles rose slightly, and his ears flattened against his head in a posture Dr. Thompson recognized as deep distrust. "That's unusual," she murmured, making notes on Chief's chart. "Dogs rarely show aggression toward familiar veterinarians unless—" "Unless what?" Earl demanded, his police training making him sensitive to unfinished implications. Dr. Thompson's mind raced through possibilities. Chief had been Dr. Brennan's patient for years, yet the dog was displaying clear signs of fear and distrust. Combined with the inconsistencies in his symptoms and the suspicious timing of his sudden decline, a terrible possibility began to form in her mind. "I want to run a comprehensive toxicology screen," she announced, "and I want to take new x-rays from different angles." "That's unnecessary and expensive," Dr. Brennan protested. "Earl's already struggling financially." "Don't give him false hope with more tests that will only confirm what we already know." Earl's jaw tightened at the mention of his finances. "Doc Thompson, if there's any chance—" "There is," she said firmly. "Chief's behavior and physical presentation don't match his supposed condition. Something's wrong here, and I intend to find out what." The blood draw took only minutes, but Dr. Thompson noticed something that made her stomach clench. Chief's blood was darker than normal, with a slightly greenish tint that she'd seen before in poisoning cases. She sent the sample to the lab with a rush order, marking specific tests for common toxins. While they waited for results, she repositioned Chief for new x-rays. The images that appeared on her computer screen were dramatically different from those in Dr. Brennan's file. Where his x-rays showed multiple tumors throughout Chief's abdomen, her images revealed only minor inflammation in the digestive tract. "Mr. Henderson," she said carefully, "I need to ask you about Chief's environment. Has he had access to any chemicals recently? Antifreeze, cleaning products, anything like that?" Earl's brow furrowed. "Well, I keep some antifreeze in the garage, but Chief never goes in there. The door's always shut tight." "What about when other people visit? Has anyone else been caring for Chief recently?" "Just Becca, my daughter Rebecca. She's been helping out this week, taking him for walks while I rested." Earl's voice faltered as an unwelcome thought crept into his mind. "But Becca loves Chief. She'd never hurt him." Dr. Thompson's computer chimed with incoming lab results. Her face went pale as she read the numbers. Then she turned to face Earl with barely controlled urgency. "Mr. Henderson, Chief has been systematically poisoned with ethylene glycol, antifreeze. The levels in his blood indicate multiple small doses over the past week or two, not a single ingestion." The words hit Earl like a physical blow. Poisoned. Someone had deliberately poisoned Chief, and the only people with access to both the dog and his garage were himself and— "No," he whispered, shaking his head. "Becca wouldn't. She couldn't." But even as he denied it, pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Rebecca's insistence that Chief was suffering, her eagerness to walk the dog alone, her nursing background that would give her knowledge of symptoms and dosages, her constant pressure for Earl to move into assisted living, which would be much easier without a large dog to complicate matters. Dr. Brennan shifted uncomfortably in the corner, his face flushed. "This is highly irregular, Margaret. You're making serious accusations based on preliminary tests that could be wrong." "The tests aren't wrong," Dr. Thompson replied coldly. "And there's something else. Dr. Brennan, your original x-rays show tumors that don't exist. Either your equipment is severely malfunctioning or these films were deliberately misread." The silence in the room was deafening. Chief whimpered softly and pressed closer to Earl, seeking comfort from the man whose trust had been systematically betrayed by the people closest to him. Earl's hands shook as he processed the magnitude of what he'd just learned. His daughter had been slowly killing his dog to force him into a nursing home. His trusted veterinarian had been complicit in the deception, filing false reports that would have led to Chief's unnecessary death, and Earl had been moments away from authorizing it himself. "Can you save him?" Earl asked, his voice barely audible. Dr. Thompson nodded grimly. "The poisoning is serious, but if we act quickly, Chief has a good chance of full recovery. It's going to be expensive, probably $4,000 to $5,000 for intensive treatment." Earl didn't hesitate. "Do whatever it takes." The emergency treatment began immediately, with Dr. Thompson working with the focused intensity of a surgeon in a war zone. Chief was placed on IV fluids to flush the ethylene glycol from his system, while activated charcoal was administered to absorb any remaining toxins. Earl sat in the corner chair, his weathered hands clasped so tightly his knuckles had turned white, watching every movement as if his concentration alone could will his companion back to health. "The next 24 hours are critical," Dr. Thompson explained as she adjusted Chief's IV drip. "Ethylene glycol damages the kidneys and liver, but we caught it early enough that the damage might be reversible. He's going to need round-the-clock monitoring." Earl nodded numbly, his mind still reeling from the revelation that his own daughter had orchestrated this nightmare. The financial implications hit him like a sledgehammer. $4,500 for treatment would drain his funeral savings completely and force him to borrow money he had no means to repay, but the alternative was watching Chief die from a preventable poisoning, and that was no choice at all. "Do whatever it takes," he repeated, signing consent forms with shaking hands. Dr. Brennan had disappeared during the initial treatment, claiming he had other patients to check on, but Earl noticed the man's expensive new truck speeding out of the parking lot as if he were fleeing a crime scene. The pieces of the conspiracy were falling into place with sickening clarity. Brennan's gambling debts, his eagerness to schedule the euthanasia, his resistance to Dr. Thompson's additional testing. As Chief stabilized on the IV fluids, Earl stepped outside to make the hardest phone call of his life. Sheriff Martinez answered on the second ring, his familiar voice bringing a measure of comfort to Earl's shattered world. "Jimmy, I need you to come to the veterinary clinic. We've got a situation here that's going to require an investigation." "What kind of situation, Chief?" Martinez still used Earl's old title out of respect, a habit that usually warmed Earl's heart but today only emphasized how far he'd fallen from the man who once commanded respect in this community. "Someone poisoned Chief. Deliberately. And I think it was family." The silence on the other end stretched for several heartbeats before Martinez spoke again. "I'll be right there." While they waited for the sheriff, Dr. Thompson reviewed Chief's case file with the methodical attention of a detective examining evidence. The timing of the poisoning corresponded exactly with Rebecca's increased visits. The symptoms had been carefully managed to mimic organ failure, requiring someone with medical knowledge to calibrate the doses precisely. Most damning of all, Dr. Brennan's falsified X-rays suggested a conspiracy that went beyond simple mercy killing. "This wasn't just about getting Chief out of the way," Dr. Thompson said grimly. "Someone stands to benefit financially from his death. I'm betting there's an insurance policy involved." Earl's stomach clenched as he remembered signing papers for pet insurance when Chief was younger, a policy Rebecca had insisted would protect him from unexpected veterinary costs. He'd forgotten about the coverage entirely, but Rebecca would have remembered. As a nurse, she would know exactly how much a terminal illness could cost, making an insurance payout seem like a merciful alternative to bankruptcy. Sheriff Martinez arrived with Deputy Kowalski, both men grim-faced at the prospect of investigating one of their former chief's family members. Earl had trained Martinez personally, molding him from an eager rookie into the steady lawman who now wore the sheriff's badge Earl had surrendered 5 years ago. "Tell me everything, Chief," Martinez said, pulling out his notebook with familiar efficiency. Earl recounted the week's events, Chief's sudden collapse, Dr. Brennan's diagnosis, Rebecca's helpful offers to walk the dog, the suspicious timing of Chief's worst symptoms. With each detail, Martinez's expression grew darker. "We'll need to search your property for evidence," Martinez said reluctantly. "And we'll have to bring Rebecca in for questioning." The words hit Earl like physical blows. His daughter, the little girl who used to ride Chief around the backyard like a horse, who had cried for 3 days when their old collie died, was about to be arrested for attempted animal murder and insurance fraud. The weight of betrayal settled on his shoulders like a lead blanket. Dr. Thompson interrupted their discussion with urgent news. "Chief's responding well to the treatment. His kidney function is improving and the toxin levels are dropping. If we can keep him stable through the night, I think he's going to make a full recovery." Earl felt tears of relief streaming down his cheeks. Chief would live, whatever else happened. Arrests, trials, family destruction, his companion would survive this deliberate attempt on his life. The investigation moved swiftly once it began. Deputies found the garage door had been forced open, with fresh scratches around the lock suggesting repeated unauthorized entry. A partially empty container of antifreeze sat on the workbench, though Earl swore he hadn't opened it in over a year. More damning evidence came from Rebecca's house, where a search warrant uncovered veterinary syringes and detailed notes about ethylene glycol dosages written in her distinctive handwriting. The insurance policy proved to be the smoking gun Dr. Thompson had predicted. Chief was insured for $15,000 in the event of his death from terminal illness, with Rebecca listed as the secondary beneficiary if anything happened to Earl. The payout would have been enough to cover Earl's mounting debts while providing Rebecca with justification for moving him into assisted living. When deputies arrested Rebecca at the hospital during her shift, her colleagues watched in stunned silence as she was led away in handcuffs. The charges were serious: animal cruelty, insurance fraud, conspiracy, and elder abuse. The woman who had spent her career healing people had nearly killed the creature that represented her father's last connection to independence and dignity. Earl refused to visit Rebecca in jail, though she sent multiple messages through her attorney requesting to see him. He couldn't bear to look at the daughter he'd raised, knowing she had been slowly poisoning Chief while pretending to comfort Earl about his inevitable loss. The betrayal cut deeper than Martha's death, because Martha's cancer had been nature's cruelty. This was deliberate evil perpetrated by someone he'd trusted completely. Dr. Brennan's role in the conspiracy unraveled quickly once investigators examined his financial records. Gambling debts of nearly $80,000 had made him desperate enough to participate in insurance fraud, falsifying medical records and diagnostic images to support Rebecca's scheme. His veterinary license was suspended pending criminal charges, effectively ending a 35-year career in disgrace. As Chief's condition continued to improve, Earl spent his days and nights in the clinic's recovery area, sleeping in an uncomfortable chair beside his companion's cage. The German shepherd's appetite returned gradually, and his characteristic alertness began to shine through the fog of medication and recovery. On the third day, Chief managed to wag his tail when Earl entered the room, a sight that made the tough old police chief break down sobbing with relief. The community's response to the scandal shocked Earl with its intensity. When word spread about Chief's poisoning and the conspiracy behind it, donations poured into the veterinary clinic to cover treatment costs. The police union organized a benefit dinner, raising over $8,000 in a single evening. Former colleagues, neighbors, and even strangers contributed to a GoFundMe campaign that not only covered Chief's medical bills, but provided a buffer for Earl's other expenses. "This town hasn't forgotten what you and Chief did for us," Principal Roberts told Earl during a visit to the clinic. "That dog saved our children, and now we're saving him." The investigation revealed the full scope of Rebecca's desperation. Divorced, struggling financially, and facing the prospect of caring for an aging father on her nurse's salary, she had convinced herself that getting Chief out of the picture was an act of love. In her mind, the insurance money would solve Earl's financial problems, while his grief would motivate him to accept the safety of assisted living. Her plan had been methodical and cruel. Small doses of antifreeze administered during her helpful dog walks, carefully calibrated to mimic the progression of organ failure. Dr. Brennan's cooperation ensured that Chief's symptoms would be attributed to terminal illness rather than poisoning. The euthanasia would appear merciful, the insurance payout a silver lining to tragedy. But Rebecca had underestimated both Chief's will to survive and Dr. Thompson's diagnostic skills. The German shepherd's desperate embrace hadn't been a farewell. It had been a final plea for help from someone who sensed something terribly wrong. And Dr. Thompson's fresh perspective had caught inconsistencies that familiarity had blinded Dr. Brennan to seeing. As Chief slept peacefully in his recovery cage, his breathing steady and strong, Earl reflected on how close he'd come to losing everything, not just his companion, but his faith in family, his ability to trust, his will to continue living independently. Rebecca's twisted kindness would have robbed him of more than Chief's life. It would have stolen his dignity, his purpose, and his connection to the memories he shared with Martha. Now, watching Chief's chest rise and fall with healthy rhythm, Earl felt something he hadn't experienced since Martha's death. Hope for the future. His companion would recover. The truth had been revealed, and justice would be served. The betrayal would take longer to heal than Chief's poisoning, but at least Earl knew who he could trust. Dr. Thompson entered the recovery area with Chief's latest blood work, her face bright with professional satisfaction. "His kidney function is almost back to normal," she announced. "Another few days of monitoring, and he should be able to go home." The word carried new meaning now, representing not just a house filled with memories, but a sanctuary where Earl and Chief could heal together, surrounded by a community that had proven its loyalty when it mattered most. The conspiracy had tried to destroy them both, but instead had revealed the strength of bonds that no amount of greed or misguided love could break. The trauma of betrayal settled into Earl's bones like Nebraska winter cold, seeping deeper each day as the full scope of Rebecca's deception became clear. Court documents revealed the methodical nature of her plan, insurance policies researched, veterinary schedules studied, dosage calculations written in her nurse's precise handwriting. Chief was recovering physically, but Earl found himself unable to sleep, jumping at every sound, questioning every kindness from neighbors who might harbor hidden motives. Dr. Thompson noticed the change immediately when Earl brought Chief for his follow-up appointment. The old police chief, who had once commanded respect through quiet strength, now sat hunched in the waiting room chair, his eyes darting toward the door whenever someone entered. Chief, sensing his master's distress, pressed closer to Earl's leg and whined softly, a sound that broke Dr. Thompson's heart. "Mr. Henderson, I'd like to discuss Chief's recovery, but first I'm concerned about you," she said gently, closing the examination room door. "Have you been sleeping? Eating regular meals?" Earl's laugh came out bitter and hollow. "Hard to sleep when you're wondering who might be trying to kill your dog next. Hard to eat when your own daughter was slowly poisoning your best friend while bringing you casseroles." The weight of his isolation had become crushing. Rebecca's arrest had shattered his faith in family, but the ripple effects extended far beyond that central betrayal. Neighbors who had once seemed genuinely concerned now felt suspect. Had Mrs. Kowalski really been worried about Chief's health, or was she gathering information for Rebecca? Did Jim Peterson's offers to help with yard work hide ulterior motives? Chief's physical recovery provided Earl's only comfort during those dark weeks. The German shepherd's appetite returned with a vengeance, and his energy levels climbed steadily as the toxins cleared from his system. But even Chief seemed changed by the experience, more protective of Earl, more suspicious of visitors, as if the poisoning had awakened dormant police instincts that recognized danger where none should exist. The legal proceedings dragged on with bureaucratic slowness that Earl found maddening. Rebecca's attorney filed motion after motion, claiming his client had acted out of love for her father, that her judgment had been clouded by stress and financial desperation. The defense strategy painted her as a victim of circumstances rather than a perpetrator of deliberate cruelty. Earl attended every hearing, sitting in the front row where Rebecca couldn't avoid seeing him. She never met his eyes, but he watched her anyway, searching for some sign of remorse, some acknowledgement of the magnitude of her betrayal. Instead, he saw only the composed professional facade she'd perfected during 25 years of nursing, a mask that revealed nothing of the woman who had once been his little girl. The community's response to the scandal created its own form of torment. Well-meaning neighbors brought food and offered support, but their kindness felt tainted by the knowledge that Rebecca had hidden her true intentions behind similar gestures. Earl began declining invitations and avoiding public places, unable to distinguish between genuine concern and potential manipulation. Dr. Brennan's disgrace provided no satisfaction. The veterinarian's gambling addiction had destroyed a 35-year career built on genuine care for animals, turning him into a desperate man willing to falsify medical records for money. His cooperation with prosecutors in exchange for reduced charges revealed the extent of Rebecca's planning, the insurance investigation she'd initiated, the timeline she'd established, the cover story she'd prepared for Chief's inevitable death. Earl's grandson, Tyler, tried to bridge the growing chasm between grandfather and reality. The 16-year-old visited daily, bringing homework to complete while sitting beside Chief's recovery bed, maintaining conversations that Earl increasingly struggled to sustain. Tyler's presence reminded Earl of continuity beyond the immediate crisis, but even that comfort felt fragile in the wake of such complete family breakdown. "Grandpa, Chief is getting better," Tyler said during one particularly difficult visit, watching Earl stare blankly at the wall. "The vet says his kidney function is almost normal. That's good news, right?" Earl nodded mechanically, but his response revealed the depth of his psychological wounds. "Good news today. But who knows what tomorrow brings? Thought I knew your mother for 48 years. Turns out I didn't know her at all." The financial impact of Chief's treatment, despite community support, forced Earl to confront realities he'd been avoiding. His savings were gone, his monthly expenses exceeded his pension, and the legal fees for Rebecca's case would drain whatever resources remained. The assisted living option Rebecca had pushed so aggressively now loomed as an unavoidable necessity rather than a choice to resist. Dr. Thompson recognized the signs of clinical depression in Earl's behavior, the loss of interest in activities he'd once enjoyed, the social withdrawal, the persistent feelings of worthlessness and betrayal. She gently suggested counseling, but Earl rejected the idea with the stubborn pride of a generation that considered therapy a luxury for people with less serious problems. "Doc, I've seen real tragedy in my 30 years as a police officer. Kids killed in car accidents, families destroyed by domestic violence, good people broken by circumstances beyond their control. This is just one old man learning he can't trust his own family. I'll get through it." But Chief's recovery highlighted Earl's decline by contrast. The German Shepherd regained his alertness and energy while Earl retreated further into isolation and suspicion. During their walks around the neighborhood, now brief, hurried affairs rather than the leisurely explorations they'd once enjoyed, Chief would pause to investigate interesting scents or greet familiar neighbors, while Earl urged him to keep moving, avoiding conversations that might reveal ulterior motives. The breaking point came 3 weeks after Rebecca's arrest, during a visit from Adult Protective Services. A social worker arrived unannounced to assess Earl's living situation, prompted by concerns raised during the criminal investigation. The woman's clipboard and official manner triggered Earl's deepest fears about losing his independence. "Mr. Henderson, we're required to evaluate whether you can safely maintain your current living arrangement," she explained, noting the unpaid bills on his kitchen counter, the prescriptions he'd missed due to distraction, the meals he'd forgotten to prepare. "Given recent events and your age, the county has concerns about your welfare." Earl's rage erupted with volcanic force. "My welfare? My daughter tried to murder my dog to steal my insurance money, and you're worried about my welfare? The only threat to my safety is sleeping in the county jail right now." Chief sensed his master's distress and moved protectively between Earl and the social worker, his hackles raised and a low growl rumbling in his chest. The dog's defensive posture reminded Earl of Chief's police training, the instinct to protect and serve that had never been corrupted by greed or selfish motives. The social worker's report would recommend mandatory evaluation of Earl's capacity to live independently, another bureaucratic step toward the assisted living facility that Rebecca's scheme had been designed to make inevitable. Earl realized with crushing clarity that his daughter might win after all, not through successful deception, but through the chaos her exposure had created. That night, sitting in his dark living room with Chief pressed against his leg, Earl faced the most difficult question of his 74 years. Was the life he was fighting to preserve worth the struggle it required? The betrayal had poisoned more than Chief's blood. It had contaminated Earl's faith in human nature, his ability to trust, his will to continue the daily battle of independent living. Chief whined softly and placed his head on Earl's lap, offering comfort in the only way he knew how. The gesture reminded Earl of simpler truths. Loyalty existed, love could be pure, and some bonds transcended the possibility of betrayal. If Chief could survive deliberate poisoning and still offer unconditional affection, perhaps Earl could find the strength to survive his daughter's betrayal and reclaim some measure of peace. The truth revealed itself in fragments like shards of broken glass, catching light at unexpected angles. Earl's world shifted fundamentally when Dr. Thompson called him 3 days before Christmas with news that would reshape everything he thought he knew about Rebecca's motives. The toxicology report had revealed something the initial tests had missed. Chief hadn't been poisoned with antifreeze at all. "Mr. Henderson, I need you to sit down," Dr. Thompson said, her voice carrying the weight of a discovery that would shatter assumptions built over months of investigation. "The lab ran additional tests on Chief's blood samples, and we found something unexpected." Earl gripped the phone receiver with trembling hands, Chief pressed against his leg as if sensing the importance of the conversation. "What kind of something?" Chief was poisoned with oleander extract, not ethylene glycol. It's a plant-based toxin that mimics antifreeze poisoning but requires very specific botanical knowledge to extract and administer. This wasn't something Rebecca could have done with her nursing background. The implications hit Earl like a physical blow. If Rebecca hadn't been capable of creating the poison that nearly killed Chief, then someone else had orchestrated the entire conspiracy. Someone with extensive knowledge of plant toxins and veterinary medicine. Someone who had been present throughout Chief's treatment and recovery. Dr. Thompson's voice continued, but Earl could barely process the words. The oleander extract was sophisticated, concentrated to precise levels that would create organ failure symptoms without immediate death. Whoever made this knew exactly what they were doing. Earl's mind raced through the possibilities, rejecting and accepting theories with the methodical approach that had made him an effective police chief for 3 decades. Rebecca had been the obvious suspect, her nursing knowledge, her financial desperation, her access to Chief during their walks, but oleander extraction required botanical expertise that no hospital nurse would possess. "Dr. Brennan," Earl said slowly, the pieces clicking into place with horrifying clarity. "He would know about plant toxins. He's been treating animals poisoned by wild plants for 35 years. The silence on the other end of the phone confirmed Earl's worst fears. Dr. Thompson had reached the same conclusion, but investigating a respected veterinarian required evidence beyond circumstantial connections. They needed proof of Brennan's direct involvement in Chief's poisoning, and that evidence would be difficult to obtain without compromising the ongoing criminal case against Rebecca. Earl hung up the phone and stared at Chief, who had been watching him with the patient attention that German shepherds reserved for their most beloved humans. The dog's recovery had been remarkable, But Earl now understood that Chief's survival hadn't been due to quick medical intervention. It had been due to Dr. Brennan's miscalculation of the poison's effects. The conspiracy unraveled with sickening speed once investigators redirected their focus toward Dr. Brennan. His gambling debts had made him desperate enough to participate in insurance fraud, but the oleander poisoning revealed a more sinister motivation. Brennan hadn't just been helping Rebecca kill Chief for insurance money, he had been using Chief as a test subject for a method of animal euthanasia that would appear natural and untraceable. Financial records revealed Brennan's plan in stark detail. The veterinarian had been developing a humane euthanasia service for wealthy clients who wanted their pets' deaths to appear natural for insurance or emotional reasons. Chief's case was meant to be his proof of concept, a successful test that would demonstrate the method's effectiveness while generating immediate income through Rebecca's insurance claim. Rebecca's role in the conspiracy had been that of an unwitting accomplice. Her genuine financial desperation and concern about Earl's living situation had made her the perfect patsy for Brennan's scheme. He had approached her with a proposal that seemed merciful. Chief was old and declining anyway, and his peaceful death would solve multiple problems simultaneously. The recordings of their conversations, captured by investigators who had tapped Rebecca's phone, revealed the manipulation that had convinced her to participate. Brennan had painted the oleander poisoning as a kindness, a way to spare Chief the suffering of a drawn-out death while providing Earl with the financial resources to accept proper care. "He's going to die anyway, Rebecca," Brennan's voice said on the recording played in court. "We're just helping nature take its course while ensuring your father isn't bankrupted by expensive treatments that won't work." Earl listened to his daughter's responses with a mixture of heartbreak and relief. Rebecca's voice carried genuine anguish as she struggled with the decision, asking repeatedly whether Chief would suffer, whether there were alternatives, whether she was doing the right thing for everyone involved. "I can't watch Dad lose everything trying to save a dog that's already dying," Rebecca's voice said, cracking with emotion. "But if Chief suffers even for a minute—" "He won't suffer," Brennan had assured her. "It will look exactly like organ failure. Peaceful, natural, inevitable." The revelation transformed Earl's understanding of the entire ordeal. Rebecca hadn't been a cold-blooded conspirator plotting Chief's death for financial gain. She had been a desperate daughter, manipulated by a veterinarian she trusted, convinced that she was preventing greater suffering for both Earl and Chief. The charges against Rebecca were dropped within days of Dr. Brennan's arrest. The evidence showed clearly that she had been deceived about the nature of Chief's condition and the necessity of the euthanasia Brennan had recommended. Her participation in the insurance fraud had been motivated by genuine belief that Chief was dying naturally and that Earl needed financial help to cope with the loss. Dr. Brennan's arrest revealed the scope of his deception. Investigators found evidence of similar schemes involving 3 other elderly pet owners in neighboring counties, all of whom had been convinced to euthanize healthy animals based on false diagnoses that would trigger insurance payouts. His gambling addiction had transformed a once ethical veterinarian into a predator who targeted the most vulnerable members of his community. Earl found himself facing an entirely different emotional landscape. The betrayal he had felt toward Rebecca evaporated, replaced by guilt over his readiness to believe the worst about his daughter. She had made a terrible mistake, but her motivations had been love rather than greed, manipulation rather than malice. The truth offered redemption, but demanded its own form of reckoning. Christmas morning arrived with the quiet stillness that only Nebraska winters could provide, snow falling in gentle curtains outside the farmhouse windows, where 3 generations of Hendersons gathered for the first time since Martha's funeral. Earl sat in his familiar recliner, Chief stretched across his feet like a living blanket, watching his family navigate the delicate process of healing bonds that had been strained to their breaking point. Rebecca moved carefully through the house, her every gesture betraying the weight of guilt she carried despite her legal vindication. She had been manipulated rather than malicious, deceived rather than devious. But knowledge of Dr. Brennan's greater culpability couldn't erase her role in nearly destroying the creature her father loved most. Her hands trembled slightly as she set coffee cups on the kitchen table, the same nervous energy Earl remembered from her childhood when she'd broken something precious and wasn't sure how to confess. "Dad," she said quietly, settling into Martha's old chair with the hesitancy of someone seeking permission to exist in familiar spaces. "I know saying sorry doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know that I never meant for Chief to suffer. I thought Dr. Brennan convinced me that we were preventing worse suffering." Earl studied his daughter's face, seeing the little girl who had once cried for 3 days when their old collie died, who had insisted on sleeping in the barn when their horse got colic, who had always possessed too much heart for her own good. The months of believing Rebecca capable of cold-blooded animal murder had nearly destroyed his faith in human nature. But the truth revealed a different kind of tragedy, a desperate woman led astray by someone she trusted. Tyler and Emma, Rebecca's teenagers, watched the adult conversation with the careful attention that children develop when their family structure hangs in uncertain balance. They had spent the past months shuttling between their grandfather's anger and their mother's shame, loving both while understanding neither fully. Chief's recovery had given them something concrete to celebrate, but the emotional landscape remained treacherous territory. "Chief forgave me first," Rebecca continued, her voice barely audible as she watched the German shepherd's chest rise and fall in peaceful sleep. "He came to me when I visited last week, let me pet him like nothing had happened, made me realize that if a dog can forgive being poisoned, maybe people can forgive being deceived." Dr. Thompson's arrival interrupted the fragile moment, her arms full of Christmas presents and her face bright with the professional satisfaction of a case resolved successfully. She had become more than Chief's veterinarian over the past months. She had become the family's anchor to hope when everything else seemed lost. "How's our miracle patient this morning?" she asked, kneeling beside Chief's prone form. The German shepherd lifted his head and tailed wagged with genuine enthusiasm, a sight that still brought tears to Earl's eyes after months of recovery. "Strong as ever," Earl replied, his voice carrying pride and gratitude in equal measure. "Been eating like a horse and sleeping like a baby. You saved his life, Doc." Dr. Thompson's examination was thorough but brief, her trained hands confirming what her eyes already knew. Chief had made a complete recovery from the oleander poisoning that should have killed him. His kidney function had returned to normal ranges, his liver enzymes showed no residual damage, and his behavior reflected the mental sharpness of a dog half his age. "Medically speaking, Chief is completely healthy," she announced, scratching behind the dog's ears with practiced affection. "But I think his real healing happened when his family started healing too." The community's response to the truth about Dr. Brennan's manipulation had been swift and decisive. The veterinarian's practice was closed permanently, his license revoked, and his assets seized to pay restitution to his victims. More importantly, the revelation of Rebecca's innocence had restored the Henderson family's standing in Millbrook society, transforming them from objects of scandal into symbols of resilience. Earl's financial situation had stabilized through an unexpected combination of community support and legal restitution. Dr. Brennan's insurance company had paid significant settlements to all his victims, while the GoFundMe campaign established for Chief's medical care had raised enough money to cover Earl's outstanding debts and provide a modest emergency fund. "I've been thinking about something," Earl said slowly. watching Chief stretch and yawn in the morning light. "This house is too big for just me and Chief. Been rattling around here like two peas in a pod since Martha passed." Rebecca's eyes widened with understanding and hope. The conversation they'd avoided for months was finally happening naturally, without coercion or manipulation, driven by love rather than desperation. "Would you consider moving back home?" Earl continued, his voice steady despite the emotional weight of the invitation. "You and the kids, I mean, pool our resources, share the expenses, maybe help each other get back on our feet." Tyler's face broke into a grin that reminded Earl powerfully of his own youth. "Mom, say yes. Chief needs his pack together, and Grandpa makes better pancakes than you do." Emma giggled at her brother's tactless honesty, but her expression showed the same eager hope. The children had been caught between two households for months, never quite settled anywhere, and the prospect of stability in their grandfather's familiar farmhouse represented more than just practical convenience. Rebecca's tears came freely now, months of guilt and isolation finally finding release in forgiveness and redemption. "Are you sure, Dad? After everything that happened?" Earl reached across the space between their chairs and took his daughter's hand in his weathered grasp. "Family means forgiving the unforgivable, honey. Martha always said that, and Chief's been teaching me the same lesson these past months. Maybe it's time this old house had some life in it again." Chief lifted his head and looked around at the assembled family with the satisfied expression of a dog whose pack had finally found its proper order. His tail thumped against Earl's leg with contentment, as if he understood that the real healing was just beginning. The spring that followed brought renewal to the Henderson farmhouse in ways Earl had never imagined possible. Rebecca and her children had moved back home permanently, transforming the echoing rooms into a bustling household filled with homework arguments, teenage laughter, and the comfortable chaos of 3 generations learning to live together again. Chief had appointed himself chief supervisor of this domestic reorganization, following Emma to the school bus each morning and greeting Tyler at the kitchen door each afternoon with the patience of a creature who understood his role as family anchor. Earl's daily routine had expanded beyond the solitary rituals of widowhood to include grandfather duties he'd forgotten he missed. He drove Emma to soccer practice twice a week, her cleats and shin guards sharing truck space with Chief's tennis balls. Tyler had taken over lawn maintenance responsibilities, but Earl supervised from the porch, Chief at his side, both of them offering commentary on proper mowing technique that the 16-year-old accepted with good-natured eye-rolling. The financial arrangement had worked better than anyone expected. Rebecca's nursing income combined with Earl's pension covered the household expenses comfortably, while the settlement from Dr. Brennan's insurance fraud had eliminated Earl's medical debt and provided a modest emergency fund. More importantly, the shared responsibilities had restored Earl's sense of purpose while relieving Rebecca of the crushing isolation that had made her vulnerable to Dr. Brennan's manipulation. Dr. Thompson had become a regular visitor to the Henderson household, stopping by monthly to check on Chief but staying for dinner with increasing frequency. Her friendship with Earl had evolved into something deeper than professional courtesy, a mutual respect born from shared crisis and common values. She appreciated his stories about Millbrook's history, while he valued her outsider's perspective on small-town dynamics that longtime residents accepted without question. Chief's role in the community had evolved from retired police dog to beloved survivor, a living symbol of resilience that resonated with neighbors facing their own struggles. Earl had started visiting Sunset Manor assisted living facility twice a week, bringing Chief to interact with residents who missed the pets they'd been forced to leave behind. The German Shepherd's gentle demeanor and patient temperament made him perfect for therapy work, and Earl found unexpected satisfaction in watching Chief bring joy to people who had fewer reasons to smile. The legal aftermath of Dr. Brennan's crimes had reverberated through the regional veterinary community, leading to new protocols for second opinions in terminal diagnosis cases and stricter oversight of euthanasia procedures. Earl had testified at licensing board hearings and legislative committee meetings, using his law enforcement background to advocate for animal protection measures that would prevent future Dr. Brennans from exploiting vulnerable pet owners. Tyler's relationship with Chief had deepened into something approaching partnership. The teenager had researched German Shepherd care extensively, creating feeding schedules and exercise routines that maximized Chief's health and happiness. Earl watched with pride as his grandson demonstrated the responsibility and compassion that would serve him well in adulthood, qualities that Chief's presence had helped nurture during a difficult period of family crisis. Emma's artistic talents had found new expression in a series of drawings documenting Chief's recovery and the family's healing process. Her bedroom walls displayed a visual narrative of their journey from crisis to redemption. Chief weak and sick in the veterinary clinic, the family scattered and hurting, then gradually coming together around their shared love for the dog who had survived against all odds. The community's response to their story had extended far beyond financial support. Earl had received letters from across the country sharing similar experiences of family crisis, pet illness, and the healing power of unconditional love. Chief's story had been featured in veterinary journals and animal welfare publications, raising awareness about the vulnerability of elderly pet owners to financial exploitation and medical manipulation. Earl's relationship with Rebecca had been rebuilt on a foundation of mutual understanding and hard-won wisdom. They had learned to communicate more directly about concerns and fears, avoiding the assumption and silence that had made Rebecca vulnerable to Dr. Brennan's false promises. Weekly family meetings had become routine, providing space for everyone to share worries and celebrate successes without judgment or hidden agendas. As autumn returned to Nebraska, Earl reflected on the transformation that one year had brought to their lives. Chief's near-death experience had revealed truths about family, trust, and resilience that might have remained hidden under ordinary circumstances. The crisis had tested every relationship, exposing weaknesses while revealing unexpected strengths. Sitting on the front porch with Chief's graying muzzle resting on his lap, Earl watched Tyler teach Emma to throw a football while Rebecca prepared dinner inside. The scene represented everything he'd thought he'd lost: purpose, family connection, hope for the future. Martha's chair remained empty beside him, but her presence felt closer now, as if her spirit approved of the healing that had taken place in their shared home. Dr. Thompson's truck pulled into the driveway for their weekly dinner, her medical bag forgotten in favor of homemade apple pie and stories from her practice. Chief's tail thumped against the porch boards as he recognized the sound of her engine, his enthusiasm undimmed by age or experience. Earl smiled as he watched his expanded family gather around the dinner table. Chief positioned strategically between Emma and Tyler where dropped food was most likely to land. The German Shepherd's brown eyes held the contentment of a creature surrounded by his pack, secure in bonds that had been tested by betrayal and strengthened by forgiveness. The dying dog's desperate embrace had indeed been a plea for help, but not the kind anyone had initially understood. Chief hadn't been asking to be saved from death. He had been asking to help save his family from the isolation and mistrust that threatened to destroy them more completely than any poison ever could. Sometimes life's greatest blessings come disguised as our worst nightmares. When Earl Henderson thought he was losing his beloved companion Chief to cancer, he discovered something far more precious: the unbreakable bonds that connect families through crisis and healing. This story reminds us that second chances aren't just about surviving illness. They're about rediscovering the love that sustains us through our darkest moments. For those of us who've weathered decades of life's storms, Chief's story proves that it's never too late to rebuild trust, restore relationships, and create new chapters filled with hope. The loyalty between humans and their beloved pets often mirrors the deeper truths about family, that real love persists through misunderstanding, forgives the unforgivable, and creates space for everyone to heal together. What beloved pet has taught you the most about unconditional love and forgiveness? Have you ever experienced a family crisis that ultimately brought everyone closer together? Share your stories in the comments below.